Hello and welcome to the Online Strength Coach podcast. As you'll see, we're recording live on Facebook. First of all, apologies for the video quality. Can only use my phone, can't use my webcam to record since Facebook hasn't enabled that facility on PC or Mac as of yet, so I have to use the phone, so it's propped up against my mic at the minute. Today's episode, we're going to be going over hypertrophy for powerlifters. We're going to split it into 5 categories. The first category we're going to go over is what is hypertrophy training. Second, we're going to go over is how does it help to develop strength. The third is lift specific work, hypertrophy specific to the lifts themselves. Then we have non-specific hypertrophy, and then finally assistance work and its worth to the main lifts and how you can utilize that within your training. So first of all, what is hypertrophy? Hypertrophy is basically a term that's used within the literature to mean muscle growth. It means, actually there's two mechanisms of the muscle getting bigger. The first one's hypertrophy, where the muscle cells themselves become bigger. So what happens is the cell becomes damaged, it sends out an inflammation marker. That inflammation marker then sends a signal that the different kind of signals. So there's IGF-1, mechanical growth-like factor. There's a whole cascade of different inflammation markers. But basically what happens is a satellite cell comes from without of the muscle spindle, comes in, and it can either join on to the damaged muscle cell to make that muscle cell bigger, or to make that muscle fiber bigger or larger in cross-sectional area, or it can join onto the muscle and create a muscle. It can create a new muscle fiber. The first one's called hypertrophy, which is in mammalian muscle, or within humans, obviously with us being mammals, is by far the greatest mechanism for hypertrophy. It's about 90%, upwards to 95% of hypertrophy or increase in muscle cross-sectional area within humans, and it makes up about between 0 to 5%. Hyperplasia makes up between 0 to 5% of muscle growth within mammalians. Well, you'll see in research, you'll see some studies done in the 70s, done on pigeons, where they attach weights to the pigeon's wings. Within a bird, hyperplasia can account for about between 50 and 60% of actual muscle growth. It's due to the different muscle physiologies we have. They're more closely related to reptiles, so they have a different. The calcium signaling works a lot different than it does within mammals or within humans. So that's basically what hypertrophy is. Hypertrophy is a gross term for an increased cross-sectional area or increased size of a muscle cell. So what's this do with, how does this help strength training as a powerlifter? Obviously, we shouldn't be too worried about how big the muscle is or how we look. We should be more worried about how strong we are in squat, bench, deadlifts. At the end of the day, that's what makes the difference as a lifter in your success. Basically what it does is any increase in cross-sectional area leads to an increased chance of muscle or force production. This is one of the few factors physiologically that's been borne out through research time and time again to show an increase in force production is just an increase in cross-sectional area or an increase in muscle size. So third, how do we take hypertrophy as a powerlifter and work it into our training within a lift specific context? Like, how can we utilize this in our training to help become stronger at the 3 lifts? Well, basically this is where volume work and work capacity comes in. So most programs, not all programs, will have some element of a high volume period or some kind of work period. So if you look at work such as Vershansky or the block periodization, where they'll go from like a hypertrophy block into like a strength block. The whole goal of the hypertrophy block or the work capacity block is to increase muscle size, increases lift specific fitness. It allows lifters to go on forward and achieve sets and reps that they might not have been able to achieve beforehand because they've done a high work period before the next block or the strength specific block. So like the term hypertrophy block, that's where it sits within block periodization. Within something like daily undulating periodization, where the hypertrophy work comes in, you'll get the high rep days, so like 3 sets of 10, as an example. In a program like 531 or within Westside, where the hypertrophy specific work or the work capacity work comes in, and Westside comes in through the repetition efforts, and through 531 it comes through something like the Born But Big, one of the suggested assistance programs that you might utilize with a program like 531, where you do 5, 6, 10, 50%. Basically it's just a volume load that's going to help hypertrophy, the lift specific to that. So within a squat, sorry, my screen just went off. Within a squat, for example, if you do the volume work on the squat, so 5 sets of 10 on squat, the hypertrophy that's going to happen along with that is going to happen for example, within the quadriceps. The hypertrophy, if you do your volume squatting, the hypertrophy along the vastus lataris, for example, will happen on the part of the muscles that actually, the run of the fiber or the run of the muscle that's actually involved in force production in that lift. So that's why performing work capacity or volume within a lift specific context with actual competition lifts is very important in program design. When you perform your hypertrophy work or you perform your work capacity work on non-specific lifts, such as a leg press or a leg extension, although it involves the same muscle groups, what it doesn't do is it doesn't recruit those muscle groups in the same manner as something like a squat or a deadlift would. Thus, any kind of work capacity or hypertrophy work performed in that setting is going to hypertrophy muscles that are either peripherally involved, so within the quadricep, a run of fibers or a run of muscle cells that aren't directly involved in force production in the squat. They may be involved directly within a leg press, for example, if that's how you've developed that non-specific hypertrophy for your quads in a leg press, so that it won't necessarily transfer over to a squat. This is where there are some problems with some suggestions, such as my quads aren't strong enough for the deadlift, or my lower back's not strong enough for this lift. Or what it takes away from the coordination involved in the lift, how motor unit firing actually happens, how the body actually lifts the weight. It completely disregards that. Looks at someone lifting arbitrarily. For example, in a deadlift, you might say that guy's slow off the floor, they're holding their position, they're holding their technique. However, they're slow off the floor, therefore their quadriceps are weak, inferring from that movement. And then we go along, we do leg extension, hack squat, leg press, and try to increase the strength of those muscles in lieu of the lower back, the hamstrings, other muscles that are also involved lifting the bar off the floor. And what we do when we take that, so for that deadlift context, when we perform that extra work, and we perform the leg extensions, the leg presses, and what have you, and then we take it back into a lift-specific context, so we take it back to that same deadlift, a lot of the times, if not all the time, you will notice that you haven't actually increased strength off the floor. What you've done is you've got better leg press, leg extension, and hack squat. You've not actually increased your strength from the floor, because you've hypertrophied the muscle generally. You've not done it in a specific context that's going to transfer over to that lift. That's why within powerlifting, the vast majority of your volume work should be done with the lift itself. So if you go through any program, so for example, if you run Smolov, you'll get a lot of hypertrophy with that program. 3 weeks of very high volume training, normally a lot higher than what people would handle normally. From that training, you will definitely get some kind of hypertrophy within your quadriceps, within your hamstrings, within your glutes. But where that hypertrophy is going to happen, it's going to happen in the run of the muscle fibers, the muscle cells. You're going to innervate the quadriceps, the hamstrings, and the glutes in a manner that's going to directly transfer into that lift. So when you do like a large volume block, such as Smolov or the Smolov base cycle, then that's what the Smolov base cycle is. The Smolov base cycle is a work capacity or hypertrophy based block within the wider Smolov program. What you'll do is you'll induce an overreach, you'll induce a high work period, you'll naturally crash down after that. So that's why you do the switching phase, which is 4 to 6, from week 4 through to about 7. I can't remember off the top of my head. But there's a period after the base cycle before you go into the intensification cycle where you do like general work like front squats, box squats, different things that take you away from actually squatting itself. But what you do in that small base cycle is lift specific hypertrophy work. That's what volume is realistically in a physiological sense. It's primarily hypertrophy work that's specific to the lift, and it's going to transfer into that lift itself. So that's what lift specific hypertrophy is. So as a powerlifter, when you do an increased volume workload or you do an increased volume block, you should primarily be doing bench, squat, and deadlift within that block. There's no real need to be doing loads of leg press, loads of dumbbell press, loads of dumbbell shoulder press, loads of machines, because it's not going to transfer into what you do. Something such as like a decline bench press, incline bench press, those will help to transfer into bench press. They've got different merits within bench press, but hypertrophy in your upper chest, for example, is not the goal of utilizing something like an incline bench press. That's more pertaining to lift-specific strength. So, for example, since we have utilized that example, what we'll do is we'll bear it out. So, in an incline bench press, as regards to bench press, where that's going to help is when in a bench press, since we've got the video, we'll use it. In a bench press, when you press up the chest and you come away, what you need to do to be able to rescue that is muscle it back down. So, being strong in this plane with a barbell is incredibly useful within bench press because we can muscle weights to come out of line if we increase our strength with a bench press. And the example of someone who isn't strong in that plane will be someone who uses like a super high arch, or they do one of those like kind of hyper arches, like a female lighter weight man who is flexible enough to get that really cut off the range of motion, huge arch, and like do that wide grip bench press. If they come out of line up or down, they're fucked. If they change their setup in such a way where they can't utilize the same sort of setup, they're fucked because they're not strong in those planes. They've got very small margins for error. Whereas if they were to maybe develop strength in different planes, maybe they would be able to deal with like a bad hand out, or they might be able to deal with someone handing up their chest or down their chest. That's where like non-specific hypertrophy comes into play. So I think we've covered over the worth of lift-specific hypertrophy, where it happens within programs, why it's there. I think the example of the Smolov squat routine kind of bears that out very well. Now we look at things like non-specific hypertrophy. So non-specific hypertrophy, we're still talking within the context of the lift. So we're still talking within the context of a bench press. We're still talking within the context of a squat. We're still talking within the context of a deadlift. Where this comes from is where we utilize other exercises. So for a bench press, we might utilize something like a dumbbell bench press. We might utilize something like a football bar bench press. We might utilize close grip bench press, different lifts that are going to help hypertrophy muscles that are involved within the movement. But we're maybe not necessarily going to utilize the lift itself to get that bonus or get that endpoint. So where we might want to do this is, for example, we'll maybe move away from the bench press because we're using it quite a lot. Let's move on to the back squat now for non-specific work. So let's say, for example, we've done 6 sets of 6 on back squat in the session. We've done, say, 70%. We're heavily fatigued within the movement. And we could do more back squat, but maybe your knees are aching, or we're starting to adapt the wrong technique because we're getting fatigued within that plane with that implement. Now, what we might do is we might go on to machines now. And what we might utilize in this scenario is maybe like a sets rep scheme, such as 3 sets of 15 to 20 reps, for example. Something that we could utilize with machine work. And what we'll do here is we will induce more volume within the working muscles. So if we use leg extension, we can induce it within the quadriceps. If we utilize a leg curl, we can utilize that same volume, that same fatigue inducing training into hamstrings. With leg press, we can do it more globally within the thigh. We can maybe use something like a kickback or a barbell extension or hip thruster to induce it within the glutes. We can target it, or we can use something like a hyper extension to induce it within the lower back. We can do different exercises that are going to induce a training stimulus on different muscle groups, but utilizing a different movement that we haven't fatigued already. We can utilize higher rep training, failure training, We can maybe do something like the dog crap protocol and a leg extension, for example, as a powerlifter. What we're going to do is we're going to induce more global hypertrophy within the muscle. And like we mentioned right at the start, this kind of global hypertrophy, this global fatigue, isn't going to it's not going to transfer in directly into the back squat. So if you get stronger on a leg press, it's not going to transfer into your back squat. It's just not going to happen. But what might transfer over is if we do loads of non-specific hypertrophy work utilizing leg press or leg extension within the quadriceps, what we do is we hypertrophy the muscle globally, and then what we can do with our training later down the field is in 8 weeks time, 12 weeks time, 14 weeks time, we can take those larger muscles now and use our squat training or use our training to innervate them in the squat, to recruit them within the squat, to then take that increased cross-sectional area, which at the end of the day increases our force production potential. But if we induce that with non-specific training, we can then utilize specific training with the back squat, with the deadlift, and with the bench press to then use that general hypertrophy block or to use that work capacity block to further our own training down the line. So all hypertrophy is good hypertrophy. So hypertrophy within the quadricep can be used. It's just not, there's a lag on it if you induce it with a different method. And the different methods are good because what's been shown pretty much time and time again within the literature when it comes to hypertrophy training is that volume is, at the end of the day, is what induces hypertrophy. It's been shown recently within meta-analysis and review that training to failure doesn't actually induce greater strength gains, does not induce greater hypertrophy gains, which would have been the anecdotal evidence would have suggested that training to failure was great for strength for about 2 or 3 weeks before you got tired, and it was like a lot of bodybuilders and a lot of people anecdotally would have said that training to failure was almost essential or one of the most powerful tools you utilize for muscle size or hypertrophy training. Whereas now meta-analysis has showed that that's maybe not the case. That's not to say that that's definitely not the case, but with meta-analysis, systematic review, it's the closest thing we have within sports science to something that is authoritarian or is truthful. So where we might be able to utilize failure training is non-specific training, like we've said beforehand, with like leg extensions, leg curls. Because although we might overtrain the leg press or we might get tired within the leg press context, what that's not going to do is it's not going to have the same effect as going to failure in a squat. If you go to failure in squat and deadlift, you're overreaching and you're going to have a huge lagged effect on that lift later down the track. If you go to failure on squat and deadlift, your training is going to suck ass for the following 3-4 weeks, and then the longer you go to failure within those lifts, the longer that's going to happen. Going to failure within squat and deadlift is desirable in some parts of training and something we may discuss maybe in a lecture or a podcast further down the track. And finally, we're going to talk about assistance work and its worth. So when we talk about assistance work, we're more pertaining to like upper back work, shoulder work, things that don't transfer directly into the lifts themselves. So one thing that we hear bandied around a lot within powerlifting is that upper back work is essential for heavy bench press, that you should do for shoulder health, you should do 2 to 3 times pulling than you can pressing. This is not necessarily the case. I think assistance work's one of the things within training and strength training within the powerlifting context that is misunderstood hugely. I think what a lot of people don't really realize is that assistance work has very little carryover, if any carryover, into the lifts themselves. So if you get stronger in a pull-up or a row, you're not going to get stronger at bench press. There is no mechanism, there is no way for that strength to transfer into a press. Like one potential mechanism you might say is if I get stronger at row, then my biceps, for example, will become stronger. Now, what a stronger muscle can do is it can, in a agonist-antagonist manner. So when your muscles act, there's agonists and antagonists. So since we're talking about the bicep here, we're talking about upper body. When you contract off the chest and the bench press, within the upper arm, the agonist or the working muscle is the tricep. Now, one thing that can stop the tricep producing as much force as possible is the bicep not acting well as an antagonist. So what that antagonist should do within the pairing to allow the other muscle to produce more force is to go silent, to stop working. Stronger muscles are better at this. So, for example, within the bench press, if your biceps aren't strong or they're not as well trained as your triceps, they can actually hinder the amount of force you can produce at the elbow joint because they won't go silent. There'll still be a little bit of noise, there'll still be a little bit of force production going on. And what your body will do, your body will regulate for this, which basically it'll put a threat, it will limit the amount of force that you can produce with the with the tricep to stop any tearing happening to that muscle pairing. In some instances, in extreme instances, agonist-antagonist pairing not working well can break your humerus, or it can break your femur in the case of a quadricep and a hamstring. Your muscles are incredibly strong. Your body has a lot of mechanisms to stop them acting to their full potential. But one thing you can do with assistance work or non-specific work is utilizing a bench row, for example, or a pendlay row or a barbell row. What that can do is we can strengthen up the antagonist muscles that we utilize within our competition lifts. This strengthening of the antagonist muscle may have a performance enhancing effect for the arm muscle because they can better act as an antagonist. However, this is quite tenuous, and we're taking something that is physiologically true. That is a thing that happens in physiology or within your body, but we're taking a bit of a jump to say that assistance work is going to help with this. Basically, assistance work is non-essential within powerlifting. Really is not. You really can get a lot of benefit or a lot of direct muscular growth or enough muscular growth from just doing the 3 lifts themselves or variants of the 3 lifts themselves to get where you need to go within powerlifting. If you're coming from like a very basic level of development, you're a novice, an intermediate lifter, or maybe you're someone who doesn't have a lot of general mass in certain areas such as the tricep or the shoulders, assistance work can be useful in some instances, but it's definitely not an essential thing. Saying things like you need to do 2 to 3 pulling depressing movements it's nonsense. It's not been borne out through any kind of training. It's one of those things that people say, and it's probably down the track. You'll hear a lot more informed people talking about that. It's not necessary to do pull-ups and rows for powerlifting. There's no need for it. One of the best examples I would take from this, and we'll probably finish on this note, was Boris Shuko said, in this day and age, or in this in a seminar in February, he said there's a lot of sports scientists or a lot of trainers now who think they're sports scientists who they track every single exercise and every single assistance work. So they track tricep extensions, they'll track dumbbell presses, Arnold presses, basically everything their lifters do. They'll track and they'll account for within their recording of training. In Boris Shuko's opinion for powerlifting, this was bullshit. He didn't see the worth in it. And that guy's probably the best, if not the best, powerlifting trainer of all time. And if he doesn't see the worth in tracking the volume load of assistance work, then that's what I will defer from that I don't need to worry about either. Because I'm not as smart as him, I'm not as good as him, and he's produced at least 40 world champions, so I'll take that as writ. Hope you've enjoyed it being live. Any comments, please leave them. Phone's been going off mad. I don't know why the fuck it's been doing that. I think at our peak we reached 7 people watching. This is fucking brilliant. Hope you've enjoyed it. Please leave a comment below how you thought of the podcast being done live. If you never want to see my face again, please let me know. If you have any questions for further episodes, things you want to hear me cover in a bit more detail in this format, please leave a comment on Facebook. Thank you very much for checking me out live. The audio of this will be up on Facebook. Sorry, the audio of this will be up on YouTube, SoundCloud, and also on the onlinestrengthcoach.com website /podcast. If you want to get in contact in a non-public way, my email is speedpowerperformance@gmail.com. Thank you very much for watching. I've been Mark. Enjoy the rest of your Saturday, and I'll catch you again for the next podcast. I'll probably do it live unless you've got many problems with that. Thank you very much for watching. I'll catch you later. Cheers. Bye.